Straight to the video. Lean beef patty is on the agenda today, and we're looking at a quad and glute workout with function. And that's actually partly why I'm speaking about this video. Yes, the chair is still creaking. I haven't replaced it yet, but I will one day. Functional training is very common within the fitness industry, but it promotes a bit of an argument because how exactly do you define training with function or functional training? We're going to discuss that shortly, whilst also giving some quad and glute tips and tricks. Two things very quickly. If at any point throughout this video you just like something I've said or just agree with something I've said, I would very much appreciate it if you did subscribe to this channel. In addition to that, if you fancy it and want to have a gander, TFNL coaching, the application is linked down below in the description or the comment section. Fill it in, I'll send you an email, we can hop on a free Zoom consultation call, chat about life, chat about training, and see if online coaching is something that can benefit you or help you work towards your goals. There's no pressure, no commitment, it's just let's have a chat, let's have a waffle, and that's always linked down below in the description. We're not going to listen to the voiceover because quite frankly, I want to give my own opinions and own take on the movements we're seeing and not basically take Lean Beef Patty's opinions and use them as my own. So we're using this as a catalyst for conversation. Firstly, let's address this. Is the squat a functional movement? Every movement is functional because it performs a function, and that function is going to be applicable in some capacity to what you're hoping to achieve. When people say functional training, what they really look for is it usually slightly dynamic or maybe involve an aerobic element. So for example, CrossFit is commonly deemed as functional because it's a mixture of anaerobic and aerobic activity. Secondly, is it a movement you would commonly do in the real world? Thirdly, is it free weight? Those are typically the common things that people jump to when looking at functional. Don't know about you, how often do you squat with a barbell or heavy weight on your back in the real world? Probably not that often. Again, sure, it's free weight, so there is a greater stability demand, but honestly, the whole concept of this is more functional than something else is a bit redundant because quite frankly, every movement is functional depending on the function in which you need that movement for. A couple of things, let's talk about the squat first. Depth, boom, boom, boom. See, this is great depth, and there's a bit of a common thing here, and I base my perception of depth on powerlifting criteria because my background is initially powerlifting, and in which case we look for the hip crease, which is here, to be below the top of the knee. So if we draw a line, boom, 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 she is just about in, which we would consider sufficient depth when looking at powerlifting. And to me, when looking at a standard squat, that's typically what I aim to see is hip crease below the knee. If you're looking at a glute bias squat, you don't really need to go much below 90 degrees, to be honest. If you're looking at a quad bias squat, you want to drive those knees forward as much as possible and get as low as possible. That being said, I actually did a video recently, I think it's on Instagram actually, where I said you don't need to squat for big legs, and that's actually just true. Actually, tell a lie, this could be coming out on Thursday or maybe next week. I'm going to do a tier list of quad movements, and squats is on there, where I speak about how you don't necessarily need to squat. I actually explain why in that video, so I'm not going to give it away. If you want to see, watch the video either Thursday or next Thursday. The Zercher squat, the Zercher squat, whatever you want to call it, people pronounce it differently, and I know someone's going to jump up in the comment section saying, but it's none of those, and you know what, you're probably right. It's a squat pattern in which you hold the weight in the elbow crease. Is it cool? Yes, it is. You can get very low with it, fantastic for range of motion, but if you consider how much you can utilize weight-wise with this movement versus a barbell squat in the back, the limiting factor here is less likely to be your legs, more likely to be maybe your arms in some capacity, or maybe even your core. In the context of building your quads and let's say lower body hypertrophy, probably not a very functional movement. If you're looking at taxing your core and developing core strength in a slightly different capacity or something along those lines, then perhaps this actually is a functional movement for the function in which you need this movement. It really depends why you want to include it. I obviously speak about a lot of movements from the context of hypertrophy and oftentimes strength training as well, but you can get strong doing anything in some capacity, and that's just because that's my preference of training. Every movement serves a purpose, and that purpose is essentially whatever you desire. If you can justify why you're doing a movement, then it serves a purpose, I respect it. And your justification behind doing this movement, despite me saying it's probably not the best for quad development, you might turn around and say, I really enjoy it. Well, this purpose is enjoyment, in which case it serves a bloody good function there. Walking lunges, I back. The issue is, I actually love them. I think they're really fun. A couple of things. 3x20, that's menacing. I'm assuming that's 10 either side, because if that's 20 either side, my respiratory system will give out far before my legs. Secondly, the issue that I sometimes have with the barbell on my back when doing lunges, I find that it really tests my stability, and I end up struggling with balance more than anything, which actually in turn takes away how effective that movement is for my intended functional purpose. If you're doing it as maybe like something cool and you want to kind of utilize a slightly different approach to training, I fully respect it. I think the lunge is a fine movement. Again, something that's heavily covered in the video that's coming out either this week or next week, discussing quad training. And that's actually based on, or following on, I should say, and discussing briefly, Dr. Milo Wolf and his video video where he tier listed a bunch of quad movements, and I strongly disagree with a lot of it in that video. See, the step up is actually a really solid movement, but one of the biggest limiting factors with that is when looking at quad development, step up's probably not the best because knee flexion is a bit limited, but it's probably actually far better for glute development depending on how you're doing it. I find it a little bit easier to make this glute bias versus quad bias, and that's just me. The second thing I note is do it in the Smith machine is incredible. One of the big drawbacks of step up variations is the fact that stability is so tested when you have dumbbells in hand. If you're doing this in the Smith machine, immediately stability is less of a concern, which means you could probably push this movement a lot harder or a lot closer to failure without things like balance, stability and whatnot testing you and causing you to fail before the intended musculature fails. So if you're doing this to develop your glutes, for example, you want to fail because your glutes have failed, not because you keep falling over and your glutes are still pretty fresh. It's a boring one. I'm not going to waste your time on it, but the leg extension is one of the few movements I do feel like you probably need to do because, again, I mention this in every video in some capacity, and I go into this in great detail, I think, in the TikTok video I did last Thursday, where I spoke about Dr. Glutes and his opinion on the leg extension and why I justified my opinion and why I think is an incredible movement, also further elaborated on in the next tier list video. Someone's going to jump in saying, well, how often do you actually do a leg extension in the wild? Well, actually, if you're extending the knee in any capacity, that is a leg extension. Someone will then jump in saying, but we don't isolate knee extension in the wild, to which I'll say, we may not, but what is really good for remaining functional is ensuring that all of the quad muscles are sufficiently worked, thus potentially reducing the likelihood of injury related to the underdevelopment of certain areas. If you train your quads really effectively, but you completely neglect your rec fem, there is an argument that you could potentially consider that underdevelopment of a very important muscle, being the rec fem there, could contribute to maybe knee pain or something similar, knee issues in general. So that's just a question to ponder. And as far as I'm aware, there's no scientific research backing that. It's just something I'm pondering and theorizing with you right now. I'm actually going to give you a secret here. If you made it this far, you get a little tip trick. So many people, when training their calves in any capacity, will say, my calves can't grow regardless of what I'm doing. I'm going to challenge you there with a couple of things. Firstly, I guarantee you're not training them hard enough. Train harder. And if you think you're training hard enough, you're probably not. Calf training is miserable. When you take your calves to failure, genuinely, it makes me feel like I'm going to wee my pants. I'm being honest with you. I'm not even joking. It makes you feel like I'm going to wee. So if you're not weeing when you're calf raising, it's probably a good thing, to be fair. But if you're not feeling like you're weeing when you're calf raising, maybe you need to calf raise harder. The second thing, look at how you're doing them. Firstly, don't do this thing, oh, lightweight, high reps for the calf. Stop it. Behave yourself. Go heavy, just like any other muscle. Oftentimes when people calf raise, you boom, 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 just like this. Stop it. For whatever reason, it seems that the calves are really responsive to stretch positions. So what I typically say is, although we know that the eccentric portion of a rep hasn't really got mass hypertrophy benefit when looking at differing tempos, it's more for technical standardization, I typically do really favor really slow eccentrics, really long, deep hold stretches during calves, and fast concentrics. We go slow, really slow, even slower than that. Hold this stretch position for like at least 3 seconds. Really hold it, it's miserable. And then once you've held it for 3 seconds, explode up. So then you explode here. That being said, you probably don't need to reach that full lockout there in which you are shortening the muscle fully. So if you get to the point where you're nearly failing and you can only get halfway up on the calf raise, that's fine. Just continue milking the eccentric and both the stretch. Trust me, do that 2 sets in a straight leg variation, like a leg press calf raise or something similar, 3 times a week, you'll be flying. The reason why I actually say doing a straight leg variation is this. When doing like a seated calf raise, it heavily biases a muscle of the calf, and that muscle isn't really massively, I guess, I don't want to say relevant, but isn't really massively considered when looking at calf development. When you think about the calves, you typically think about the big meaty one on the outside there being the gastrocnemius, and that is going to be heavily utilized when you're doing a calf raise with straight legs, which is why I typically say a straight leg variation 3 times a week, 2 sets, to failure, good tempo, big stretch. Do that for like 6 months, and honestly, you'll be calf raising some mad weight, you'll be in mad pain, and you may wee yourself, but your calves will grow. And to be honest, I really just wanted to utilize this video to actually kind of give my take, as I mentioned earlier, about functional training. Is, like I said earlier, I will repeat myself, all movements are functional, depending on the function in which you need that movement for. So again, people can argue, say, oh, weightlifting isn't functional, bodybuilding isn't functional, machines aren't functional. Your definition of functional is probably not universal. It's probably dependent on you and your beliefs, which to me, I would say in my belief, like I said, anything is functional, depending on the function in which you need it for. Just a quick one, I know, bit of a waffle. I really need to stop talking about leg training, but for whatever reason, whenever I do any upper body related videos, they never do as well. Seems like leg training in any capacity tends to be a bit more favorable from the audience, so maybe you should start training your upper body more and listening to my upper body advice as well. But regardless, that is it. That is a video. And I'd love to hear your opinion in the comment section below. So let me know, what is your definition of functional? I'm curious. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating the link to the TFNL coaching application, which is down below in the description and the comment section. And thank you for tolerating the video.